Hi, everybody. This is the video version of a vaccine hesitancy train the trainer that Marin County provided to community-based organizations in late May. We have recorded this for you all to help train your staff in how to talk with vaccine hesitant folks. So we're going to go over a couple of different things during this talk. First is trying to understand why it matters that we know how to talk about vaccine hesitancy and understanding where vaccine hesitancy comes from, how to talk with folks that are vaccine hesitant, and then talking quickly about some tools and resources that the county has provided to help you in your efforts around this, as well as finally how to train your staff in talking about vaccine hesitancy effectively. So let's start with the objectives of this talk. We want you guys to be able to understand what contributes to vaccine hesitancy, learn the key communications techniques to talk with vaccine hesitant folks, and to learn the key training techniques so that when you train your staff, you can be effective and create a great training environment. So if we start out why this training matters, it matters because vaccine hesitancy has evolved. We have more vaccines now than we did 30 years ago. We also have more voices talking about vaccines, particularly voices that are not supportive of vaccines, and we have more access to disinformation. The combination of the three of them have really created an environment ripe for vaccine hesitancy. It's also important to note that vaccine hesitancy is part of a trend that's happening both in the United States, but also around the world. It's part of climate change and political polarization, and it's the trend of a devaluing of expertise. And so when folks are vaccine hesitant, we need to recognize that there may be more going on than simply just questions and concerns about vaccines. And the last thing that I want to leave you guys with before we dive into this is folks who support vaccines often struggle to understand people who don't. And they equate vaccine hesitancy with people who are stupid or ignorant or bad. And I want to disabuse everybody of that right now. People who are vaccine hesitant, by and large, have legitimate questions that need to be answered. And we need to encourage people to be asking those questions and really get past these preconceived notions we have around vaccine hesitancy. It's not productive, and it certainly isn't true of all vaccine hesitant folks. So let's dive in a little bit around vaccine hesitancy and better understand what it is. The first thing we want to talk about is where it came from. It's something that's been around for quite a bit. It really did have its beginnings in a paper published by a physician in 1998 who claimed that there was a connection between autism and vaccines. But that study had a lot of major problems. The conclusions were not based on statistics, and the sample size was tiny. It was 12 kids. There is absolutely no way that you can draw any legitimate conclusions from 12 children. There also was no control group. So it's impossible to determine any associations between MMR and autism. And MMR was the vaccine in question that he was talking about. But if you don't have a control group, there's no way to determine what was attributable to the vaccine as opposed to what you would see regularly. It was also not based on medical records, but it was based on people's memories, which are notoriously biased and faulty. And then finally, it made vague conclusions that weren't statistically valid. Now, at the end of it, that Lancet paper was withdrawn, and the physician in question did lose his license to practice medicine, but the damage was already done. And this was the signal of the beginning of the vaccine hesitancy movement. One of the reasons vaccine hesitancy has taken hold is honestly because vaccines are a victim of their own success. So if you look at this on the left-hand side, back in the 1900s, an annual case of measles, which would be this dark blue circle right here, was about 500,000 cases. In 2016, you'll see that that dot is so small that it was only 85 cases. Another one that we can look at is, let's look at this turquoise, pertussis, which is also known as whooping cough. Back in the 1900s, an average year had about 200,000 cases of whooping cough. In 2016, we had less than 11,000 cases. So you can see that vaccine preventable diseases have gone down as vaccines have become more and more available. What that means is that if we don't see those diseases, our perception of the disease is very low. We don't see it, so therefore we think it's not a risk. We also don't see the long-term consequences of these diseases. So those health-related issues, like congenital heart disease or blindness or deafness. And because we don't see them, again, our perception of how dangerous these diseases is also very low. What we don't realize is the reason we don't see them is because they are held at bay by vaccines. The third reason that really impacts our perceptions around vaccines, frankly, is misinformation. And of course, our big venue of misinformation is social media, and we'll get into that a little later on. So the combination of the three have made folks who maybe were a little anxious, had some questions about vaccines, really solidify that into a vaccine hesitant posture. We also need to remember that vaccine hesitancy is a continuum. It's not a one size fits all. So if you look at this on the far left, that darker green, are the majority of us, we accept vaccines. In the light green is where vaccine hesitancy starts. And that is folks who accept vaccines, but they have some doubts. We get into the yellow where folks delay or refuse some. And then we start to get into the far end of the continuum, which are those who refuse vaccines or deny vaccines. And what I want to say here is the folks who refuse and deny may have a very large voice, but we need to remember that they're actually a very small percentage of folks in the entire continuum. The majority of our folks in the continuum accept but have questions, or a smaller percentage of them delay or refuse some and accept others. It's that green and that light green that we want to focus our attention on, because those are the people who are looking for answers. We don't really want to focus our attention on the orange or the pink, the refusers or the deniers. Generally speaking, for COVID-19, those are long-term conversations. And what we're really looking to do with COVID-19 is get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible to ensure that variants don't take hold that may not be receptive to the vaccines, work as well with the vaccines. And so what we're really doing is focusing on those people who have questions but are likely to be vaccinated once their questions are answered. The one thing we do need to keep in mind when we're thinking about who those vaccine hesitant people are, there's one commonality among them and among everybody, regardless of how we feel about vaccines. It's that we want what is the best for our families. And people who are hesitant, even frankly, people who are anti-vax, they believe they are truly doing what is right for their family. They got bad information and we can't fault them for that. And so when we are interacting with these folks, I want to really reiterate to be kind, be respectful, be supportive. We need to remember that they got misinformation. It's not that they don't care about their families. Of course they do. We generally know that there are 4 pathways to becoming vaccine hesitant. The first is perhaps a negative healthcare experience. In today's healthcare world, a lot of our healthcare providers do not have the time they would like to be able to spend with their patients. And so oftentimes questions around preventative medicine, like vaccines, get shuttled down to the bottom of the line, and they run out of time for those kind of questions. And if this is something that's top of mind for a patient, they may feel like they were ignored or not valued, and it may formulate into a negative experience for them. That will impact how they feel about vaccines. Social media and regular media, we'll get into that one in a moment, have a huge impact on how people feel about vaccines. Conspiracy theories are another one. And the important thing to remember about conspiracy theories is that conspiracy theories are, as psychologists explain it, are largely about a person's belief in the unjustness and unfairness of society today. They have less to do with vaccines themselves and more to do with that unjust feeling. And they manifest in a bunch of different ways. So it may be a conspiracy theory about politics, or it may be a conspiracy theory about vaccines. The thing to keep in mind when you encounter someone who believes conspiracy theories about vaccines is these are deeply held beliefs. This is a large part of their worldview. And so you want to make sure that you don't challenge them directly, but that you ask questions to help them self-reflect. And then the final and also very influential area is our peer groups, our family, our friends, the people that we surround ourselves with. They matter to us. What they think matters to us. And so if we have a lot of folks in our social circle who are vaccine hesitant, it is likely that we are going to be influenced by that. So going back to social media, there's a fine balance between being informed and being panicked. And in media, there's an old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And so oftentimes the media around an issue is very, very dramatic, much more dramatic than it needs to be. And by way of example, when I was pulling together this presentation, I did a quick search on social media and news on J&J blood clots. And these are the things that came up. We have, I think it's Jim Cramer, who is actually a finance guy. Why he would be weighing in on a vaccine, who knows? We have a lot of really scary posts from famous anti-vaxxers like Robert Kennedy. And then we have everyday people who are talking about worst case scenarios. And this is all very frightening. But here's the reality around the J&J vaccine and blood clots. You are 25 times more likely to be hit by a plane in your own home than you are to develop a blood clot from the vaccine. So if you look at this graphic, you'll see at the very top is the lightest orange. That is the lowest risk of developing a blood clot. And that is the people who are vaccinated with the J&J vaccine. Their risk is 0.000088. We had 6 incidences of it in 6.8 million doses. It is an infinitesimally small risk. We do need to make people aware of it for sure, but we need to help frame it with how likely this risk is. It is incredibly unlikely. I want to draw your attention to the very bottom where the highest risk is. Patients who have severe COVID-19, 31% of them will develop a blood clot. So the real risk is the disease. It's not the vaccine. And in all of our communications, we need to do a better job at really being clear on what the true risk is. When we think about why vaccines, other people's choice to vaccinate should concern us, here's the reason why. We know that we're going to need probably around 80% of the United States, or anywhere, any community, anywhere, to be vaccinated in order for that community to have what's called herd immunity or community immunity. And what herd immunity means is that enough people are vaccinated in that community that the people who cannot get vaccinated, whether they're too young or they're very ill, if they can't get vaccinated, they are protected by the people around them. And that is the way we get rid of COVID. As long as it has a place to circulate, it will continue to circulate, it will continue to mutate. And the risk is that eventually it will mutate into a strain that does not respond to the vaccine. So it's in everybody's best interest that we get vaccinated. But if we look at this slide, this is telling us two things. The first is telling us a census survey that was done in March about how likely people were to get the vaccine once they were eligible. And so let's just look at California. In California, you can see it's generally folks were pretty likely. They were between 53 and 64% likely to get the vaccine. However, as of May 18th, the percent of Californians who were fully populated was only 39%. So either way we slice and dice this, if we look at it as the folks who were willing to get vaccinated, even at 64%, the high end of that likelihood, it's not herd immunity. If we look at who we have fully vaccinated at 39%, it's still not herd immunity. So we need to be working with those folks who have questions to help them get their questions answered so that they can feel confident in getting vaccinated and protecting themselves and their families. And when they protect their families, we're all better protected. So let's talk about actual communication with vaccines. It's not as easy as it sounds. And I think a lot of people, because they don't want to get into it with a vaccine hesitant person, they avoid that conversation. And I'd like to encourage you to have the conversation, and I'm going to give you some tools to do that. So the first thing I want to say to you all is make sure that you're sharing messages that are transparent, that are consistent and frequent. And this is really important because people need to hear things around seven times for it to start to register, for them to start to remember that message. They need to hear it 10 or more times for them to be able to internalize it and consider making a behavior change based on that message. They not only need to hear it frequently, but they need to hear it consistently from a diverse group of speakers. And so the more they hear it from a diverse group of speakers, so the government, their faith-based leader, their doctor, their community-based organization, the more credible that message becomes. So consistent, frequent. We also want to make sure it's a positive message. COVID is scary, and we do need to make sure people clearly understand the risks with COVID, but people respond better to positive messages than negative messages. And we also need to make sure that they're personal, and I'll get into that at the end of the presentation. We want to encourage you guys to help community leaders, experts, and trusted messengers share these messages, and you should be sharing those messages from these types of people as well. So there's 4 steps in talking about vaccines that I want to give to you. It's a 4-step process to make it easy for you. And the first step is find out how people feel about vaccines. You want to ask a question in a way that it's a presumptive positive. Have you gotten your vaccine yet? So that's a presumptive positive. You're assuming they will. You just want to know if they had. And the presumptive positive frames things for people to be in an agreement mode. They subconsciously recognize that that's a social norm. So if they say no, then you want to find out what the barrier is. It's generally 2 different types of barriers. So if they say, no, I haven't, I have concerns about the vaccine, that's an information barrier. So you want to ask them what their biggest concern is with the vaccine. Pin it down to one issue. If it's an access barrier, maybe they say something like, oh, I just haven't had time. Then you want to ask them what would make it easier for them to get the vaccine. So again, the steps here are finding out how someone feels about it in a presumptive positive way, and then following up with a second level question to determine exactly what the barrier is, whether it's an information or an access barrier. And some quick tips for this step. Ask open-ended questions. That helps people talk more. You don't want to give them questions that they can answer with a yes or no, because the more they talk, the more you're able to understand what they think and feel. And whatever they respond, don't judge, don't push, don't coerce. We often think that our trying to convince folks is the right thing, but we need to remember sometimes when we try to convince, others feel like it's coercion. So you want to be a little more nuanced and gentle in your approach here. It's a conversation. It's a process. It's a two-way street. It's not you giving a speech and expecting them to make a decision to do what you tell them to do. So this is step one, find out how they feel about vaccines. Step two is to be empathetic. This may be the most important step of all. When we talk with people, we make an unconscious split-second decision whether we find somebody credible and trustworthy. And the reality is most of that is based on how they interact with us and less about what they actually say. And so you want to make sure that you, first of all, have the body language that shows that you are interested, that you are kind and you are concerned and caring. That's open body language. You don't want to cross your arms. You don't want to have a scowl on your face. But when you start to engage with them and talk with them, you want to validate their concerns and encourage their questions. Oftentimes, vaccine hesitant folks feel like they're not allowed to ask questions. And that's just not true. We want to encourage questions. So you want to say things like, when someone mentions a concern, I totally get that. I had that same concern. You're validating their concerns. You want to try to find some common ground. So if, for instance, their concern was that they want to start a family, and maybe you have young children, you can say, I totally understand that. I recently started my family too, and believe me, I was asking a lot of the same questions, finding that common ground. And again, this is the value of asking those open-ended questions, because you will learn about them and have opportunities to find that common ground. You also want to affirm a person's autonomy and ability to make good decisions. This is your decision. I'm here to answer any questions you may have to best protect your family. And a note, remember, you'll note here that I said protect your family. That is a far more compelling message than protect your community. Keep it personal. And the quick tip here is empathy comes from listening carefully. If you are thinking in your head how you're going to respond to somebody, you're not listening carefully, and you may miss something important that they're trying to share with you. So make sure that you give them your undivided attention. Step three in the vaccine conversation is always ask permission before you give any information. Can I share some information I learned with you? Or I'd love to connect you with Dr. Smith, who is an expert in vaccine safety. Would that be okay? I know I gave you a lot of information and it's a lot to digest. Can I touch base with you next week to see if you have any questions? The reason we ask permission before sharing information is because we need the people to feel like they are in control of this conversation, that they have autonomy. This is their choice to engage. This can be a process. And so the quick tips here are to be really patient. If that person needs more time, find a way to connect back with them. And our last step, which is also an incredibly important step, probably as important as being empathetic, is helping them identify their own good reason. So you can ask things like, what did you miss most since COVID? What's been the hardest thing for you since COVID? And if they say, I miss hugging my grandparents. Well, once you're vaccinated, that's something that you can do again. We need to remember that vaccine decisions are often made with our hearts and not our heads. And so these are emotional decisions, and you want to help people identify what COVID has taken away that the vaccine can give them back. You want to affirm the value of what they miss and show them the benefit of that vaccine. So for me, the biggest thing was I missed hugging my parents. And that is something that I most looked forward to when I got vaccinated. And I often share that with people to affirm that their family choices are, I get it. I also share their family choices. And I also understand the value of the vaccination in that. You want to make those personal connections when you're talking about this, because that's usually the things we've missed most. It's our family, our friends, our places of worship. Those social and personal connections are the things that most people have missed. And those are really strong benefits for getting vaccinated. You want to think about important events, grandmother's 90th birthday, their parents' wedding anniversary, their niece's wedding, a special trip they had planned. All of those things are also really good reasons and personal motivators for getting vaccinated. So those are the 4 steps to vaccination. I want to be able to give you guys just a little bit more information on things to do when you're talking with different types of folks on the vaccine continuum, vaccine hesitancy continuum. So the majority of us, more than half of us, will definitely get the vaccine. For these folks, we want to make it easy for them, remove those barriers, whether it's access or technology. And also, really importantly, we want to remind them to be advocates through word of mouth and social media. Social norming is a real thing, and it's important for others around us to see that we support and value vaccination. About a quarter of us will probably get it. And these are the folks that just need their questions answered. So you want to identify and address any information gaps they have or concerns they may have. You want to support an act now mentality. So again, that act now mentality comes from having a realistic risk of the disease. If someone says, yeah, I'm going to get it, I just haven't had time, say, I'm really glad that you're going to get it. I'd love to help you get it sooner than later, because the risk of the disease is very, very serious, and you want to protect yourself before you get it or give COVID to someone else. And you also want to help identify their own personal good reason to vaccinate. Again, really getting that act now mentality. Well, I know you miss your grandparents. As soon as you can make some time to get vaccinated, you can hug them, you can talk with them, you can sit with them. So can I help you find an appointment that would fit into your schedule? We have about 14% of us who say, I'm probably not going to get it. So these folks, we need to identify who they trust and help connect them to the person they trust who can help give them credible information around vaccines. We want to increase their perception of agency and choice. Oftentimes, these folks feel like they're trying to be coerced into something they don't want to do. And I don't know about you, but when that happens to me, I often dig my heels in. So you want to make sure that you reiterate that it's their choice, that you're here to help them get the right information. You want to try to find that common ground, and you want to use personal stories over statistics. The folks who say, I'm definitely not going to get it, these are your anti-vaxxers. You don't want to judge, you don't want to patronize. You want to identify that common enemy. It might be COVID. They may also have a conspiracy theory that they don't believe COVID is real. It's going to be, sometimes it can be challenging to find a common enemy, but you just want to make sure that you leave room for a future conversation, that you leave it in a way that they could change their mind in the future without losing face. And that's why it's really important to say things like, I'm here for you. I don't share your beliefs, but I respect your decision. And I'm here for you if you have any questions in the future. I want to also talk to you about a technique, storytelling. So I've mentioned a couple of times the value of personal stories. And this is so important when we're talking to individuals. There are generally 4 types of information. The first is data, then it's filtered data, visualized data, and the story of data. And so the value to the public increases along this continuum. So data in of itself has very little value. And here's what data looks like. Patients were assessed a mean of 60.3 standard deviation, 13.6 days after onset of the first COVID symptom at the time of the evaluation, and only 18 or 12.6% were completely free of any COVID-related symptom. So that's a lot of words. And for those of us who do this as a living, that research is really important. But for folks trying to make a decision about vaccination for themselves and their family, it is less important. So let's look at how we filter it. So this is how JAMA, a JAMA research letter, filtered it. They filtered that exact same data and said 25 of 43 Italian patients ranging in the age of 19 to 84 years still experienced physician-confirmed COVID-19 related symptoms an average of 2 months after their first symptom emerged. Better, but still not super compelling for the general public, right? Here's where it starts to get interesting for the public. This is where the value is for the public in visualization. So when you look at these visualizations, you can see, oh gosh, I thought I was at 32 years old at no risk of COVID because I'm healthy and young. But look at that. A third of folks who get COVID in my age group have a prolonged symptom. They're a long hauler. Wow. And then look at, oh, on the right-hand side, the long hauler symptoms are smell disorders and taste disorders, pain, headache. Geez, this is more serious than I thought it was, right? Visualization starts to shape the narrative in a way that is valued to the public. But here's where the real money is. It's in storytelling. So here's the story I tell about this data. And the story, this is a true story, is I have a friend from grad school. He's 44 years old. He's very healthy. He runs the Boston Marathon every single year. He is super fit. And he got COVID in May of 2020 and has not worked since. He is a classic long hauler. He's been in the hospital 5 times for cardiac issues related to COVID. He has trouble remembering things. He has very little energy. And his wife is now the sole breadwinner and primary caregiver for their family. They have 2 children under the age of 5. And so he was the age group that people generally think to themselves, I'm young, I'm healthy. He was very fit. He didn't think he was at high risk for COVID, but COVID can strike any of us. And so why would we take the risk? So with that story, I have taken all that data about long haulers syndrome and I've personalized it. And I've also tried to frame the risk perception and then brought it home saying, why would you take the risk? Creating that sense of immediacy and urgency for the vaccine. And this is where, when we're talking to individuals, that we want to focus our attention is in the storytelling. So here's how you tell a story. You practice, 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 right? You want to identify the purpose of your story. What is the message you want to get across? You want to keep it short and focused. We are not writing a novel here. This isn't David Copperfield. People don't have that kind of attention span. Keep it short. You want to make it personal. If it's not your own story, then it should be someone you know. You want to use emotion and empathy. And most importantly, please don't be the hero of your own story. The second someone is like, and then I saved the day, most of us are turned off by that and are like, ugh, we're not interested. So this is how you tell a good story. And it's really important that you think about what your stories are and you tighten them up. I can't reiterate enough that practice is the key to a good story. All right, I want to take a quick moment. We have developed 2 tools that will help. The first is a flip book. We are in the process of getting these to our community-based organizations who are working, and so we will have them for you all very shortly. The flip book is a great tool that combines the visual and really simple messages, and the value of it is we've created the behavior change messages for you based on the science, and everybody will be using those consistent, transparent, clear messages so that people will hear them over and over again the same way from different sources. Again, remember in the beginning of the presentation, I said that that's really important. So the flip books are great. They're large enough that you can show the images to people. And on the back of every page, they are blank. And the reason they are blank on the back of every page is to allow you to take notes about the things that you want to talk about on each of these slides. So if maybe it's a story or a specific statistic that is super compelling that you want to talk about. And when I say statistic, I don't mean, a standard deviation of 13.6. What I mean is a statistic that resonates with people, like that you are 25 times more likely to be hit by a plane in your own home than to develop a blood clot due to the J&J vaccine. That's the type of statistic I'm talking about if you want to use them. But the back of the flip books are yours for your notes. And I encourage you to take the notes so that when you're showing people the front, you have what you want to say right on the back and it's true to your voice. The other thing that we have for you all is a conversation guide that has most of the frequent questions that we've gotten from the 800 number. We asked our promotoras and our health educators what they were being asked. And so we compiled a guide that gives you all the short answer if someone is not interested at all. It's the 1 sentence, 30-second answer, and the longer answer, which is still a pretty short answer. We really recommend, if at all possible, always give the longer answer. It provides the nuance. It provides the compelling evidence around whatever their concern is. The only time that you would use the short answer, and the short answer is going to be highlighted. It's the first sentence of every response. The only time you use that is when you can tell by the look on their face or their body language that you're losing them. Give them the short answer and move on. But normally what we recommend is that you would use the longer answer. So we have these 2 tools for you. And we have trained the trainers how to use them so that they can share them with you as well. And then finally, I want to talk to you all about training staff. Now, if you were using the first part of this presentation to train your staff, you can turn it off here. But if you would like to train more trainers, you can keep the presentation going. And so here's a couple of important techniques around this. The first thing is you want to create a really good learning environment. So a good learning environment has a couple of components to it. First, it's a group learning environment. Most adults learn better in a group. It allows for a really rich dialogue. It allows for role playing so people can see techniques in action. It's just a much more compelling, interesting, and frankly, fun experience for folks. The second thing is you want to be a facilitator. And the way you facilitate is you encourage participation. You embrace equality, where trainers and participants work together, and you acknowledge the expertise of your participants. So what we need to remember is when we are training adults on skills, they are coming to the training with an awful lot of experience and expertise in of themselves. And we want to embrace that. And we want to encourage them to share what they know as part of that learning environment. I will tell you the times when I am really focused on creating this environment where people can participate, I learn as much as my participants learn, because I learn from them. You want to encourage everybody to be involved. Some people may be shy. You don't want to force them. Let everybody participate in a way that feels comfortable for them. And in every training, you want to give time for folks to practice. Role playing, particularly in communication techniques, is extremely important. I also want to talk to you guys about how you correct things that are said in the training. And this is part of creating that safe space, because there are no wrong answers in a training. We want people to feel free to give their opinions. But that said, you may have to reframe some stuff. And so a good way of reframing is something like, thank you for sharing that. I want to share another approach that also works well. The other thing that's really important, and I encourage you all to practice this, is using the sandwich method when giving feedback. And the sandwich method simply is, you say something positive to warm up the discussion. You sandwich your constructive criticism in the middle, and then you end with something positive to soften the constructive criticism. And the way that would look in real life is, if someone, were giving a role play, my sandwich constructive criticism might be, I loved your engagement. It felt really welcoming. And that is a great way to make people understand that you are on their side. It's a great way to show empathy. There may be an opportunity to be more clear on the safety facts when you're delivering those. You might want to spend a little more time with the flip book and being familiar with that. But I also want to reiterate that the way that you reacted with folks, the way that you encouraged them to ask questions was fantastic. And that's a really important way to get people to open up to you. So positive, constructive criticism, positive. The other thing that I want to encourage folks is keep it simple. This is a training. This is not a graduate course. We can only learn so much in a short time frame. And so you only want to train what they absolutely need to know to do the job or skill well. You also want to use words and concepts that your participants know and that feel familiar. And so in learning, there is a pyramid of learning. The first is your data, then information, then knowledge, and then wisdom. Wisdom is sort of applied knowledge. And this is where we want to focus on the wisdom. And so here's the difference between all of them. With data, you're talking about that, 6 female individuals with a mean age of 38, standard deviation of 18 to 48, developed post-immunization cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. Those are blood clots. So then the information is the risk of post-vaccination CVST is 0.000088, right? The knowledge is the risk of this blood clot after getting the J&J vaccine is extremely rare. But the wisdom, and this is what you want to focus on, is you are 25 times more likely to be hit by a plane while you're in your own home than to develop the blood clot from the vaccine, right? And so again, what we're trying to do is just train at that top level of communication that is most engaging for the public. And that's the wisdom. We also want to make training sticky. And what I mean by sticky is you want to help people to remember what they learned. So if you look at this pyramid, this is a reverse pyramid. At the top, you'll see reading. In 2 weeks, we'll remember about 10% of what we read, about 20% of what we hear. If we're only listening, we don't have visuals, about 30% of what we see, about 40% of what we watch. So that would be a movie, a demonstration, something that has us more engaged. And then 70%, this is where we want to focus, 70% of what we say. So if we are having a discussion, we're encouraging our participants to be part of that dialogue and to engage, they're going to remember about 70% of it in 2 weeks. If they're able to do it, if you save time in your training and you do role playing, you encourage time for practice, they will remember about 90% of what they learned. And so those two bottom are really where you want to focus your time. Now, this is hard to do in this day and age. We're doing a lot on Zoom. As you can tell with this presentation, it's not very engaging. I apologize about that. But in real life, in person, try to focus on the bottom two as much as possible. I also want to talk to you guys in training about how to funnel questions. And this is, I want to be clear because there was some confusion when we gave this in the face-to-face training. Funneling questions is a technique used for training to help people build their problem-solving skills and learn. It is not the same technique that we use when we're talking to the public about vaccines. So funneling questions is you start off with that yes and no answer, right? And then you get broader so that they can really hone in on what's important. Now, when we're talking with the general public, remember I said ask only open-ended questions, no yes and no. This is, again, just the differences. This is for training purposes. And so here's how this would look. You start with a yes or no. This is such a safe question that people will feel like they can risk being involved in the training. Should we treat vaccine hesitant people with respect? Yes or no, right? Everyone's going to say yes. That's an easy one for people to get hooked into the involvement, into the participation. All right, great. I'm glad we're all in agreement on that. What does respect mean? So you get a bunch of different answers and you can pull one out and say, yeah, excellent. It means we treat them the way we want to be treated. So how are ways that we show that respect? And someone will say, well, we can be empathetic. That is an absolutely great start. How can you make sure that you're showing empathy? And someone will then reiterate, I acknowledge their feelings are valid and try to find common ground. They'll pull things from your training. So this is how you sort of funnel and get them to critically think through it and problem solve themselves so that they're giving you the answers rather than you giving them the answers. It's a great training technique that allows folks to really remember what they have learned. All right, I also want to talk quickly about neutralizing negatives in trainings. Generally, most folks are really great in trainings, but every once in a while you'll have somebody who is having a bad day or for whatever reason is not at their best at the training. One of them is a know-it-all. These are people who, for whatever reason, really feel like they need to one up the instructor, one up the trainer. And here's how you can sort of neutralize that. You want to thank them for their valuable insight, and you want to joke with them good natured. You know, you've got so much experience. Maybe we'll tap you to do the training next time. You know, but for now we need to move forward. If they continue to try to, to take over the training, you can then say something like, well, I know Sam knows the answer. It's clear you've got a ton of experience. Let's give someone else a chance to answer. And then if it continues to be a problem, you can cut them off nicely and say, I would love to hear more about your experience, but we are running over time. So maybe you and I can have a quick discussion during the break. And during the break, you can listen to what they say. You can also reiterate that just for the purposes of the training, that you're not going to always be able to call on him because you want to give other people a chance to participate as well. The other person that you may find in a training is someone who is rude. This is less common, but it does happen. You want to shut this down immediately because remember, training is effective when it's a safe space. And when someone's being rude, it suddenly takes that safe space away from everybody and they're not having fun, they're not engaged, they're not learning. So you want to shut down any rudeness really quickly. So you can acknowledge that they're frustrated politely, but you want to make it clear that it's not okay. So you could say something like, Susan, I totally get you're frustrated. I'm not sure this is a group conversation, so why don't you and I talk during the break? Don't be rude back, don't escalate anything, but do seek them out during the break and speak to them privately. And you can be clear with them that, you understand where they're coming from. You can, tell them that that it's whatever they're feeling, they have a right to feel. However, this is a group dynamic and there are certain ways that we behave in a group dynamic, and that in order to make this a good experience for most everybody, that you would ask them to sort of play along. That usually does work and tampers down any problems you may have. Okay, so there we go. That is the training we have. I sure wish I had been able to make it a little more interactive for you all. But again, I'm hoping that the folks who came and took the face-to-face training will use this as a resource with you all. And do please reach back out to the county if you have any questions. And thanks so much for being a vaccine advocate and a person who's willing to take the mantle and have these conversations with folks who are looking for credible answers. Have a great day.